Greetings! I am Herbert Erperderp, and today I'm going to make some hills with cuttings in them using these pieces of 3mm MDF, which I very roughly cut from MDF placemats. Also, these cork trivets that you'd use to place hot pots on. These are just right for making rocky surfaces. It breaks apart easily and looks quite convincingly like rock, even without paint. This is going to be quite a simple project. I start by cutting a slice of the cork. The knife doesn't have to go all the way through, you can just snap it off. Don't use your good knife for this, it will dull the blades really quickly. On this first one I started roughing up the cork before gluing it down. On subsequent pieces I glued first. It looks fine either way, though you can more easily match the shape of the layers if you glue them all together first. The idea here is to make it look like roughly dug out dirt and rock. This can be kind of messy, but as a bonus you can scoop up the chunks you cut off and keep them for later use, perhaps as rubble in a destroyed city or something. To make the cutting high enough for things to hide behind, I add a few layers of cork and continue ripping chunks out with my knife. I aim to do this in such a way that you can't see where the pieces of cork join. You can use a model to check the height. 3 layers of cork wasn't quite enough for my liking, so I decided to add partial 4th layers just to add some variety and height. Once I had all the layers to my liking, I roughly went over it with an old toothbrush to get rid of the tiny dusty particles and such. Next, I built up the other side of the hill. I didn't want to use all of my cork trivets, so I used some cork floor tile. These are a lot harder and don't break apart nearly as easily as the trivets do. I had considered using foam, but I didn't have any on hand. I cut the tile into appropriate sizes and glued them on to provide a fairly gentle slope. This is just to provide a little bit of structural support for the next step, which is to use plaster cloth to form the hill. This is really quite messy. If you care about your work surface being very clean, then this should probably be done outside. Simply cut some pieces of the plaster cloth to an appropriate size, wet them, and then place them onto the cork, trying to make gentle slopes. You can rub your finger on the cloth to spread the plaster around a little bit and hide the lines that the cloth makes. This wasn't as easy as I had hoped, but it isn't difficult. You could of course use clay or some kind of putty to form the hills, but I had plaster cloth just sitting around waiting to be used, so I used it. I left the plaster to dry overnight and then trimmed any excess bits hanging over the edges of the MDF with a knife. The final thing I did was to use some Milliput to fill in any holes and gaps left between the plaster and the cork, and to add a little bit of interest to the shape of the hills. Here is my result. I'm fairly happy with them, though I think they will look much better once I paint them and add grass. I had considered adding rocks and other odds and ends to the hillsides, but I didn't bother, mostly out of laziness. They'll simply be grassy hills, which is good enough for me. They are, after all, intended to be quick and relatively easy hills to add just a little bit of interest to a gaming table. I built them with Flames of War-sized models in mind. A lot of tanks and trucks should be able to hide behind these, along with any infantry. These could also be very easily scaled up for games that use larger models like Bolt Action. I made these using stuff I had laying around, but even if you did need to buy the materials it would still be rather cheap. I used 2 MDF placemats that cost about 50 cents each, the trivets cost about $3 for a pack of 3, and I used about half a $3 roll of plaster cloth. Add the cost of the putty and a couple of cents worth of floor tile and you're up to about $7 or so. Not too bad. I'll get around to completing these soon, and I will of course video the process. Eventually, I'll link that here. I hope this has been helpful or interesting for you. Perhaps it's given you some ideas for your own terrain pieces. As always, leave any comments below and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Thanks for watching. Farewell.